Okay, going over a couple of things. I've had some questions in a couple of forums and comment sections on other videos, about what to do for insulation on the small structure retreat buildings. First, I'm going to say it works differently from regular houses, but not majorly differently from regular houses. There is some stuff that we pretty much write off, and this is assuming the parameters are that you're doing your construction in remote areas without immediate easy access to, let's say, a major building supply store like Home Depot, but you may shop at Home Depot before going in. We're also going to assume that you may not be working with full power. You may be working with entirely cordless tools, solar powered stuff. You're unlikely to have 220 power available. You may not even have 110 power available at full power. You may not be able to come and go from the construction site as you would with a regular place in town. The other thing that may not be happening is you may be spending long periods of time not living there full time, which means that when the building's not being occupied, it's not being heated and cooled. You may be gone for a long period of time, and there may be rodents, vermin, critters, bugs, things like that, which are not noticed or dealt with as quickly because you're simply not there. Okay, so let's go over a couple of choices. One, we got the regular ordinary pink insulation we've seen in a lot of houses. This is the blow-in version, and right now, because it's the expanding blow-in version, you have to have the machine to do it. Okay, you can't just take the stuff and then just start spreading it by hand. A few people say so, not really. This is basically the compact way this gets packaged, and what happens is you can kind of break the package apart and then put it in the machine, and it expands a lot. So the thing is, you got to haul the machine in and out. Okay. And you'll see how this works with attic type stuff and adding layers of insulation. But that's an attic space that's unlikely to be used. Okay, that goes in a crawl space. This stuff, you're unlikely to be using it as much around small spaces. Okay, if you have a narrow space to work with, it's not going to work too well. It is very cost effective if you have access to the machine. Okay, so if you have access to the machine, it's very cost effective, 99 cents a square foot. Now, cubic feet, basically what it is when you feed this stuff through the machine, it says it expands to 16 times. But that's mainly attic installations where it just kind of goes freeform, okay? Which means if you try to crawl around up there or do anything, it gets all over the place. And that's why I do not recommend this for retreat situations. I really don't. I don't think you want to mess with it. Now this stuff, regular ordinary pink insulation, paperback stuff, you staple it in. Relatively straightforward to deal with. Your problem is that you get the itchies, you got to clean up, it gets all over your clothes and all over your stuff in there. If you're building the place in stages and you have this stuff sitting around exposed, it's a hassle, and those fibers are going to get all over the place. And if you don't have showers and cleanup and laundry and everything really readily available for the end of the workday, you're going to be fucking miserable after dealing with this stuff. So as far as hauling in, semi-completed buildings, yeah, that's great. But if you're trying to deal with this stuff on remote location construction, you don't have running water, you don't have replacement clothes and laundry ready to go, this stuff's going to be a major hassle to deal with. The other thing is, it has to be attached or stapled to stud framing in order to work, and that's why it comes in relatively standard widths, whether it's 24 or 16, or it's set up to deal with 2x6 or 2x4 walls. There is a way you can take the 2x6 stuff, kind of tear it in half, and use it on 2x3 framing, but you lose the paper backing, and it's not the end of the world. It's just a hassle to deal with. So that's a situation with relatively conventional stuff. And then you got this recycled paper stuff. They say it's been treated to be fire resistant, but it has a lot of the same issues that any of the other blown-in insulation has. It takes a special machine to use it, and it's basically attic insulation. And the other thing that happens is when this stuff breaks down, it turns into dust. So you're going to end up with a very dusty area when you're dealing with it. The other cool thing, if you're doing regular house stuff and it's an attic that you're not likely to be going in, they'll do the free machine thing if you buy the bags of the stuff. But I again recommend against it. What a lot of the alternative house builder people are using and recommending is this stuff. And this tends to work okay. Now this one's kind of like a natural material. If I'm not mistaken, this one's made from a form, something that comes from soybeans. Kind of neat material, relatively flame resistant, but it's expensive. Okay, it's expensive. Of course, it depends on the thickness. The thing is about the thin stuff, the R factor rating isn't very high on this. R3.2, that's only a fraction of the insulating value of the stuff that would normally go in a house, but it's better than nothing. And what a lot of people are using in a lot of structures is nothing. So this is kind of interesting. The other thing is, because it's got the foil reflective, it's used in certain types of alternative horticulture operations. Same with this stuff. Okay, so it can be the insulation of choice in basements and concrete structures, alternative material structures, and any place where you expect a lot of moisture and wide temperature variations, and you don't want that moisture to degrade anything that's going on. The other thing is, because of the reflective material in there, it's actually, the R factor has to do with its passive heat pass-through. If it's radiant heat that you're trying to trap or keep from moving from room to room, this stuff doesn't work on a regular R factor because you've got that reflective material. So if you've got something with a radiant heat source that you're trying to keep from getting from one area to the other, this is actually a little better than what the labeled R factor would tell you it is. If it goes inside of a wall, then obviously the reflective material is of diminished value, but it actually does still matter. And so this is really good in damp environments, and it's also really good if you're adding insulation to a building that was not previously insulated. Let's say it was built with the OSB and a framing. You decided to put an interior in the building before insulating it, and you would then put siding over this stuff. And there are people that do that as a retrofit type situation. Let's say a building was transformed from a work shed or barn or storage shed, and then had been finished out, and then after being finished out, somebody said, hey, you know what, we don't have enough insulating value out of the empty walls. We don't want to tear the drywall out to put insulation into it. Well, you add this stuff to the outside of the building. It works, you just don't get the insulating value that you would get with using the pink insulation to begin with. But it does work. It's okay, and it's easy to deal with. It's non-toxic. You cut it with a knife or even a worn-out circle saw if you want to do precision cuts. And it's slightly bendable. It's semi-structural. If you're trying to insulate a dome that didn't otherwise have stud framing that you can staple this other stuff to, or something that doesn't have its own air space that you can fill with other insulation, this stuff works. You just have to realize it's not going to have the same levels of insulation value as something that is fluffy. Okay. Another very similar material is this pink semi-rigid foam, which is this stuff. And I think over here they're talking about using some of this with garage doors. Semi-structural. A lot of it's set up on a tongue and groove type of thing. Not very expensive. It's basically a lot like the other foam, but without the reflective cover, which means that if it's going to be like inside of a wall, you really don't care about the reflective covering. You save a few bucks by getting this stuff. and it's not bad. I've worked with this. It's okay when you're doing, let's say, camper trailers and stuff that had a combination of metal and wood components. And a lot of times you can use construction adhesive to hold this onto metal. It works. I mean, it does what it's supposed to do. It just doesn't have the same R factors as some of the others, but it depends a little bit on thickness. But if it's going to be covered over, and you feel you're not justified in spending the extra money on a stuff that has a reflective material that can reflect radiant heat, it's okay. Okay, and then they sell the liquid nails right next to it for using that with a foam board. Lastly, and although they show it in some specialized applications, is this bubble wrap type stuff, but it's actually got a little more foil, a little more reflection to it. You'll see this a lot in the RVs, but it's also used as a layer between, let's say, stud wall framing and brick, rock, or concrete. It works. Okay, it's not bad. $21.95 a roll. The thing is, you get 25-foot rolls, so cost effectiveness on this is decent. So anyway, oh, I gotta get going soon. But anyway, so that's a little bit of our discussion on what insulation to pick for remote location stuff. All right, and following up the last video segment, the last segment I was in a Home Depot store, and this is a Lowe's store. It'll have a lot of the same or very similar products like this reflective material, although I believe the Home Depot didn't have it in its larger size. And this is good for really wet environments because it doesn't really change anything if it gets wet. It's also good for metallic stuff and stuff where space is at a premium, but it also doesn't have a whole lot of R factor compared to some of the other insulation. I will have to repeat myself, it is better than nothing. It's a lot better than nothing. This is what they're going to sell in bulk compared to the pink insulation that you'll see at Home Depot. And it basically does the same thing, except what I've noticed, just whatever this version is, it's not the pink stuff, it's, from another company. You'll see this installed at places and see that darker color and think, oh, it's older. Well, no, it's not. Actually, that's the way it comes. It comes in that darker color. And it's going to be inside walls or inside ceilings. So it's a little bit more natural camouflage color depending on the application, but that's kind of not relevant as much because it's inside of stuff. But it's still, you have all those issues with handling fiberglass. So if you're in a remote location, it can be a problem, as far as cleanup and needing gloves and getting it all over your clothes. So, but I've noticed that it does have a little bit higher R factor. In fact, some of this goes up to R38. It really insulates, okay? Really, really insulates. That's why they sell more of it than anything else, obviously, quite a bit. They do still have some of the same spray and stuff. I covered that in the other thing where it comes compacted. You blow it in with the machine. I recently dealt with that stuff in the walls of a house, and it's a little bit labor intensive. And I'll be honest with you, I don't like it. I really don't like this stuff. This stuff, I gotta look. Yeah, this is where it comes in sections instead of rolls. Middle of the road stuff. I don't mind dealing with that. This is really inexpensive soundboard, but it does have insulating qualities as far as temperature goes. And then they'll sell some of the exact same foam core, plastic on both ends. One end is reflective type stuff. And this material's really good for some of those spaces where you're not going to get any other kind of insulation in. It's not super cheap, but it's relatively easy to work with, and it's semi-structural. I've seen people make improvised shelters just by taping this stuff together, and it works. Okay, it does work. You can tape this stuff together. It's semi-structural, and it works with metal framing too. So it does work. It's not as insulating as some of the other materials, but it is far, far better than nothing. And it is, I would call it semi-structural for improvised type structure material stuff goes. Not super cheap, but there are instances where it works. You get a little thinner and it gets cheaper. And then, of course, the thinner it gets, the less structural it gets. You still get that reflective tape, and of course, it's totally impervious. If it gets wet, it just doesn't lose any value. And then there's a version that doesn't have the reflective material on it. And I don't even think you're saving any money. They just say it's a little bit stronger, a little bit more impervious to getting wet. You'll see this around dock houses, boat houses, stuff that might have a lot of moisture getting in. The other thing that has become really fashionable with the tumbleweed tiny house type stuff, at least around here, is this ultra touch denim. Sorry about the background noise. The ultra touch denim is basically shredded recycled fabric, which includes a lot of denim. They don't have any that are open right now, but it actually tears off in sections, and then you can see on this display how it comes apart in sections, and you can pull those sections apart and put them into the wall section by section. So if you have irregular gaps in the walls, you can actually deal with that depending on how you put those sections in, and they kind of go in like a little brick block thing. The other thing I really like about this stuff is that it handles, there's none of the issues that you have with fiberglass when you handle this, and you don't need a knife to work with it. You can just kind of pull it apart in the sections, and then the smallest sections aren't incredibly hard to tear apart and stuff into a wall. It really is. I like this stuff. I really do. I don't see a R factor. They call it R19. So for the amount of space that it takes up, it's not the same as using fiberglass. It's not quite as much R factor as using fiberglass. Really easy to work with. It is a little bit more expensive than going with the equivalent amount of fiberglass. You got $40-50 bucks for each package, but a package does go a pretty long way. And if you're talking about a small house, small cabin installation, you're not going to notice as much of a difference on the entire installation on whether or not you spent more on the material. It's just not, it's not a major part of the operation. If you're using this much cheaper stuff, obviously you are spending significantly less. But don't forget, this being $11.98 for each roll, those aren't very big rolls. So when we look at these things being 40 or 50 bucks, they're really closer equivalent to this stuff, which doesn't have a price on it. But if I'm not mistaken, these things are still like 35 bucks each. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's really close to that. So I am recommending the denim stuff for off-grid, unless you're thinking it's really going to be, there's whatever reasons, whatever alternative construction material you're using. If there's a strong likelihood of water really being inside those walls because of other factors in your construction method, then yeah, go with the foam. Go with the foam if you think that your construction method is really going to have water in the walls. Some of the Ramder stuff, there's just a moisture that goes along with that, then you got to use a plastic-like material. Fiberglass can kind of deteriorate when it gets wet, but it takes a long time because the fiberglass itself really doesn't. The paper can fall apart, and it can still act as a home for mold, mildew, and stuff like that. It's just that it doesn't really break down on its own from the mold and mildew. It will compress, will get nasty. There is a point when it's got to come out of there if it's really gotten a lot of water in there. But this stuff here, if it gets waterlogged, it can be a problem.